She walked into the airport quietly, carrying a small backpack and a gentle smile, the kind people often wear when they are used to moving alone. She didn't stand out in any way. She wasn't loud. She wasn't dressed in anything special. And she didn't try to get attention. To everyone waiting at the gate, she looked like a regular traveler. Someone checking the time, someone minding her own business, someone blending into the background without effort. The flight attendants noticed her only for a moment when she handed over her boarding pass. They nodded politely. She nodded back, and that was all. Nothing about her made anyone look twice. When she reached her seat near the window, she sat down calmly and glanced outside. The weather was clear, the runway was shining in morning light, and the aircraft's wings looked steady and peaceful. A young man beside her tried to start a conversation, asking if she was traveling for work or vacation. She simply smiled and said she preferred quiet flights. Her voice was soft, almost careful, as if she was used to choosing her words. The man nodded and didn't push further. It seemed like she liked silence, and he respected that. As passengers settled in, some struggled with bags, some argued lightly over seat arrangements, and some chatted happily about their destinations. In the middle of all that noise, she remained still. Every movement she made was gentle, closing her seatbelt, adjusting her jacket, placing her backpack under the seat. People around her saw only a calm, ordinary woman who seemed tired from life's usual routines. No one imagined anything unusual about her, and she seemed perfectly fine with that. When the plane began to push back from the gate, she took a slow breath, the kind that comes from years of discipline, not nervousness. But no one noticed. The cabin crew moved through safety instructions, parents tried to calm their kids, and the engines began to hum louder. She simply stared out the window at the wide open sky, almost as if she understood it more than anyone else on board. After takeoff, when the plane lifted smoothly into the blue, a small shift happened in her eyes. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't excitement. It was something more complex, something like recognition. Like the sky was not just a place above the earth, but a place she once knew deeply. A place she once belonged to, but she didn't say a word about it. She kept her story sealed inside her like she always did. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, the captain greeted the passengers and thanked them for flying. The woman listened politely, but her attention seemed elsewhere. She was watching the horizon, studying the clouds, quietly reading the patterns in the sky as if they mattered. She looked normal, yes, but there was a depth in her calmness. A story she carried that no one suspected. About an hour into the flight, something unusual happened, but no one inside the plane felt it yet. Far away, outside the commercial air corridor, 2 F-22 fighter jets were accelerating through the sky on a routine patrol. Their pilots were scanning radar screens, checking for unusual signals. It was a normal day for them. Clear visibility, stable air, no alerts. Then a small notification blinked on their system, showing a civilian aircraft's ID code. It wasn't an emergency signal, not a call for help, just a normal flight path. Yet one of the pilots felt something familiar about the aircraft's registration code, though he didn't immediately understand why. He zoomed in on the data. The system cross-checked the flight path with names associated with past clearance histories. One specific name quietly appeared in his memory, a name he had heard long ago in a highly respected circle. He blinked, looked again, and still wasn't sure. But something inside him told him to double-check. He radioed air control. Meanwhile, inside the plane, the woman closed her eyes for a moment. Her breathing stayed calm. No one around her had any idea that the sky outside had shifted in ways they couldn't see yet. She looked like a normal passenger, reading a peaceful moment between clouds. The man in the seat beside her took out his headphones and watched a movie. The flight attendants discussed snacks in the galley. Everything felt normal. But in the control tower miles below, a communication officer suddenly turned toward his supervisor with surprise. A message had arrived from the F-22 patrol team. The request was unusual, polite, but direct. They asked for confirmation. They asked for passenger details. They asked for one specific name. It was the woman's. The officer frowned, confused. Why would elite fighter jets ask about one quiet passenger on a normal flight? On the plane, she opened her eyes slowly, as if she sensed something in the air shift. Even though no alarm sounded, no announcement was made, and no one else noticed. But she noticed. Something from her past, something she had kept hidden, was suddenly reaching toward her again, and the sky was calling her name. The woman shifted slightly in her seat, not because she was uncomfortable, but because something in the air felt different. It was a quiet change, like a subtle pressure shift that only someone with years of experience in the sky would notice. She looked around the cabin. Everyone else remained relaxed, reading, talking, sleeping. No one sensed what she sensed. She rested her hand on her backpack for a moment, almost checking something inside, then gently removed her hand as if reminding herself she wasn't here in that role anymore. She was a passenger today, nothing more. That's what she promised herself. At the same time, the captain of the aircraft received a soft notification from air traffic control. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't alarming. It simply said, "Confirm manifest. Request. Name verification." The captain raised his eyebrow. Name verification during a normal flight was unusual. It didn't happen often, especially not from military channels. He called the first officer and showed him the message. They both looked confused. Inside the tower, the communication officer tried to be calm as he replied to the F-22 pilots, asking why they needed the information. The response came back with a single line: "We believe a highly respected former clearance bearer is on board." The officer didn't fully understand what that meant, but the respect in the tone was clear. Whoever this person was, they weren't an ordinary traveler. Meanwhile, the woman looked out the window again, her eyes drawn to the sky ahead. She recognized the altitude, the direction, even the subtle vibration that indicated a slight shift in wind layers. She knew these things not because she was guessing, but because she had lived many years above ground, guiding metal wings through storms and silence. Still, she kept her expression calm, careful not to reveal anything. The man sitting beside her finally noticed something. "You okay?" he asked softly, trying not to disturb her. She turned toward him with a polite smile that didn't fully reach her eyes. "Yes, just thinking." He nodded and returned to his screen. He didn't ask more. He didn't know her thoughts were not ordinary thoughts but calculations. Patterns. Quiet instincts responding to signals she hadn't heard in years. Far away behind the plane, two F-22s changed their path slightly. Not toward the aircraft, but parallel to its course, matching altitude. The pilots maintained distance, but they were close enough to visually confirm the aircraft type. One of them spoke softly into the radio, a tone that carried recognition rather than authority. "Control. If the name is confirmed, notify us immediately." Inside the plane's cockpit, the captain reopened the message. This time, the request was direct. "We need to confirm if a woman named ___ is on board." He read the name silently. He didn't recognize it. The first officer didn't either. But something in the message felt heavy. Not dangerous, important. Carefully important. The captain sent a request to the cabin crew to verify the passenger list discreetly. In the cabin, a senior flight attendant walked down the aisle with a tablet, pretending to check seatbelt signs and passenger comfort. She moved casually, making sure no one suspected anything unusual. When she reached the woman's row, she glanced gently, noting her calm posture and quiet presence. Nothing about her suggested importance or authority. She tapped her screen, pretending to review seat numbers, then continued walking. A moment later, she returned to the galley and sent a quiet message to the cockpit. "Name confirmed. Passenger is on board." The captain read it and froze for a brief second. The first officer leaned closer. Neither understood why fighter jets would care about a single quiet woman in a window seat. In the sky behind them, the F-22 pilots received the confirmation. There was a small pause, the kind that carries respect rather than surprise. One pilot exhaled and said, "I knew it. Maintain formation. Keep distance. Inform tower we acknowledge her presence." When the message reached air traffic control, the officer stared at it again. He still didn't understand everything, but one thing was certain. This wasn't security related. This wasn't about danger. It was about honor, recognition, something from the past. Inside the plane, the woman finally shifted her gaze away from the window. She didn't panic. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply breathed in slowly, as if something she had left behind long ago had finally caught up with her. A young flight attendant approached her politely. "Ma'am, is everything okay? Do you need anything?" She looked at the attendant with a soft expression. "No, thank you. I'm perfectly fine." But the moment the attendant walked away, the woman rested her fingers lightly against the armrest. She knew. She didn't need an announcement or a message. Anyone else would think the sky was quiet, but she could almost feel a presence. Two silent aircraft flying near, keeping formation like old guardians. They weren't here because of danger. They were here because of her. Not her today. Her from long ago. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the past settle before opening them again. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this. She had chosen a quiet life, far from ranks, far from codes, far from a name that once traveled across secure channels. But the sky had not forgotten her. And now neither had the F-22s. The plane continued smoothly across the sky, yet something invisible had shifted around it. It wasn't danger. It wasn't fear. It was a kind of quiet respect moving through the air, like a silent escort no one on board knew existed. The woman could sense it more clearly now. She didn't need to see the jets or hear any radio calls. She could simply feel the rhythm of the sky. It was the same rhythm she used to work with, the same one she once trusted with her life. It had a pattern, a tempo, and right now it felt familiar, almost welcoming. She leaned her head slightly toward the window. The sunlight washed across her face, soft and warm. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened for a moment, as if remembering something far away. Memories she had carefully put away now tapped gently at her mind. Behind the scenes, the cockpit received another message from air traffic control. This one was even more unusual than the first. It read, "F-22 patrol acknowledges confirmed presence. They will remain nearby for respect protocol." The captain blinked at the words. Respect protocol? He had never heard of anything like that. Military aircraft did not adjust course for passengers, unless that passenger had once held an extraordinary position. The first officer whispered, "Who is she?" The captain could only shake his head. "Something more than she looks." Back in the cabin, a quiet buzz started between the more observant flight attendants. They didn't know details, but they sensed the cockpit was receiving oddly frequent messages. One of them joked lightly, "Maybe royalty is on board." The others laughed softly, but a senior attendant didn't join in. She had a feeling, a quiet instinct, that there was more to the small woman in the window seat than they realized. The woman herself sat still, her posture straight but relaxed. She wasn't tense. She wasn't hiding. She simply carried herself like someone who had learned long ago that calmness was strength. She watched the clouds stretch beneath the wings, flowing like a soft river in the sky. Each movement of the plane reminded her of the days when she wasn't just a passenger but someone responsible for guiding large aircraft through unpredictable air. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "It's been a long time." The man beside her glanced over, curious but too polite to ask. He sensed she had layers, stories she wasn't ready to share. He lowered his eyes back to his screen, giving her space. Meanwhile, up in the sky not far behind them, the F-22 pilots flew in controlled silence. One of them finally spoke, not through official channels but softly into his cockpit mic, as if talking to a memory. "If it really is her, she used to be a legend in training circles." His wingman replied, "I heard about her too. Never thought I'd see her name again." "Not see," the first pilot corrected gently. "Honor." Their jets held a respectful parallel distance, their presence quiet but steady, a gesture known only within certain circles of aviation. Inside the plane, the woman's fingers traced the edge of the window lightly. Not nervous, just thoughtful. She knew why the F-22s were there. She knew they wouldn't interfere or approach closely. They were simply acknowledging her presence in the sky, just as she once acknowledged the presence of countless pilots during her service years. It was a silent salute, one that didn't require words. A slight tremor ran through the plane. Not turbulence, just a tiny adjustment in course. But she noticed it instantly. Her eyes flicked toward the overhead panel, her mind automatically interpreting the change. Old habits resurfaced with surprising ease. Her senses sharpened, not out of fear but out of instinct. She could tell the aircraft had entered a smoother jet stream. She could almost predict the next minor adjustment before the autopilot made it. For a moment, she forgot she wasn't in the cockpit. Then the reality returned, and she forced herself to sit back. She was not here to lead or command. She had left that world behind for reasons she didn't like revisiting. Reasons tied to loss, responsibility, and a promise she made to herself. She wasn't running from anything. She just needed to rebuild life on quieter ground. And yet, the sky had found her again. A soft announcement from the captain interrupted the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are cruising at a steady altitude. The weather is clear. Enjoy your flight." His voice sounded calm but carried a tiny tension only trained ears would catch. He was aware something unusual was happening. Even if he didn't understand it fully, the woman did understand. She placed a gentle hand over her backpack once more. Not to open it, just to feel it. Inside was a small item she always carried. Not because she needed it, but because it reminded her of who she used to be. A symbol of her past, a piece of her identity she kept private. When she lifted her eyes again, her expression was a mix of acceptance and quiet strength. She wasn't afraid of being recognized. She simply thought those days were over, days when her name meant something in military circles, days when her decisions shaped the sky. But here she was, sitting in a normal airplane seat, and somewhere beyond the clouds, 2 F-22 jets were flying a respectful escort because of her. It wasn't attention she wanted. It was a reminder she didn't expect. A reminder that some names never disappear from the sky. The flight entered a peaceful stretch of sky where the air was smoother, almost calm enough to make passengers forget they were thousands of feet above the ground. People leaned back, ordered drinks, scrolled through their phones, and lost themselves in their own routines. Everything felt normal. Everything looked normal. But for the woman by the window, nothing about this moment was normal. She could still sense the F-22 jets flying somewhere parallel to them. She didn't need to see them to know. The air carried a certain energy when fighter jets were nearby, subtle but familiar. It reminded her of nights when she used to guide young pilots through narrow corridors of unpredictable winds, teaching them how to trust their instincts when instruments went silent. Over time, she had learned to read the sky the way others read faces. But today, she wasn't guiding anyone. She wasn't giving commands. She was simply sitting in seat 14A, trying to stay invisible, trying to live quietly. She had not expected the sky to recognize her again. A soft chime echoed as the flight attendants began offering snacks. One approached her row with a friendly smile. "Would you like something to drink?" The woman looked up politely. "Water, please." As the attendant handed her the bottle, she paused for just a moment, long enough to really look at the woman. Something about her eyes, her posture, her silence felt disciplined, refined, like someone who had spent years under pressure and learned to stay calm in chaos. But the attendant didn't ask questions. She moved on, unaware that she had just served someone with a history strong enough to move fighter jets. A few rows behind, two frequent travelers exchanged whispers. They had noticed small changes in the cabin crew's behavior, discreet glances toward the front, hushed conversations in the galley, short messages passed to the cockpit. Nothing dramatic, but enough to spark curiosity. "Do you think there's a medical emergency?" one asked. "No idea. Maybe a VIP?" the other replied. Their guesses floated quietly through the cabin, unheard by the woman who now rested her hands on her lap, her mind stepping back in time. She remembered the last day she wore her uniform. She remembered leaving the airbase after years of service, promising herself she would step away completely. She had rebuilt her life since then. Quiet job, small apartment, simple routines. She chose peace after years of intensity. But peace did not erase who she had been. And the sky, clearly, had not forgotten her. In the cockpit, the captain received another message from air control. He read it twice, making sure he understood it correctly. F-22s request permission to perform silent escort until aircraft exits controlled zone. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an order. It was a polite request, one that carried deep respect. The first officer leaned forward, confused. Sir, escorts are only done for high-honor personnel, retired or not. The captain nodded slowly. Whoever she is, she must have meant a lot up there. Neither spoke about it again. Protocol required them to stay professional, keep the cabin calm, and avoid unnecessary questions. But curiosity hummed quietly beneath their focus. Meanwhile, the woman felt a tiny shift inside her chest. Not sadness, not fear, but something like gratitude mixed with hesitation. A silent recognition. She hadn't asked for this. She never wanted attention. Yet the gesture from the F-22s reminded her that the hours she once spent guiding aircraft, training pilots, and making difficult decisions had left a mark deeper than she realized. The man next to her finally gathered the courage to speak again. "I'm sorry if this sounds strange," he said softly, "but do you fly planes? You just seem really calm for someone on a long flight." She looked at him for a moment, her expression soft but unreadable. "Not anymore," she answered gently. "But I used to." He smiled, thinking she meant small planes or hobby flying. "Oh, that's cool. Like private flights." She didn't correct him. "Something like that," she said with a quiet nod. He returned to his screen, unaware of how close he was to a truth he might never fully understand. The plane continued forward, sunlight pouring across the cabin in golden streaks. The woman closed her eyes briefly, not to sleep, but to breathe, to steady herself. She could almost hear echoes of old radio calls, voices of young pilots she had mentored, people who trusted her guidance during their toughest moments in the air. The escort wasn't for fame. It wasn't for ceremony. It was simply a reminder. Her presence in the sky still mattered. When she opened her eyes again, she sensed the F-22s adjusting their distance, preparing to ease away once the flight left their patrol zone. They wouldn't say goodbye. They wouldn't reveal themselves to passengers. Their gesture was subtle, meant only for her. Not the woman in seat 14A, but the leader she once was. A faint smile touched her lips, the first true expression she allowed all day. It was small, private, meant only for the sky. She whispered under her breath, "Thank you." No one around her heard it. But somewhere beyond the clouds, two pilots flying sleek aircraft felt something too. A shared respect, a quiet connection to a figure they had only heard stories about. And the sky, for the first time in years, felt like home again. The sky ahead grew even clearer as the flight continued, the clouds spreading out like quiet white fields far below. Most passengers were relaxed now, drifting into naps or scrolling through their phones without noticing anything unusual. The perfect calm made the cabin feel like a small, floating world untouched by the secret movements happening outside. But the woman could still sense the presence in the air, the respectful formation of the F-22s holding steady at a distance. It was almost like a heartbeat she could feel but not hear, a familiar rhythm she once understood more deeply than words. She kept her gaze on the horizon, letting the past settle slowly inside her. She didn't try to hide her thoughts anymore. She allowed herself to remember. A long time ago, she had stood inside tight, high-pressure rooms where screens glowed with warnings, where young pilots waited for her instructions, trusting her voice through storms and darkness. She remembered being calm when others panicked, speaking softly even when everything around her demanded speed. She remembered the pride she felt when pilots returned safely, not because of her name, but because she guided them well. That life had shaped her in ways she never fully understood until she walked away from it. The man sitting beside her noticed she seemed deep in thought again. He hesitated, then said in a gentle voice, "I hope I'm not bothering you, but you seem like someone who's been up here a lot. You look at home in the sky." She turned slightly toward him. His voice wasn't pushy, just curious and kind. I used to spend a lot of time in the air, she admitted quietly. More than most people. He smiled. So that explains it. You don't react to turbulence or anything. I guess when you've flown a lot, you understand the sky better. She nodded but didn't give more details. She appreciated his respectful curiosity. She knew he sensed something unusual, but he didn't push for answers. He allowed her silence to be her answer, and she appreciated that more than he knew. In the cockpit, the captain received another soft notification from air control. This one was brief. F-22 escort will exit zone in approximately 4 minutes. They acknowledge presence with highest regard. The captain exhaled slowly, impressed by the language. He turned to the first officer. I've never seen a message worded like this, he whispered. Me neither, the first officer replied, staring at the screen. Whoever she is, she earned something rare. They both remained silent after that. They understood enough to know this wasn't an emergency. It wasn't about danger. It was simply an honor, one they happened to witness without being part of. Back in the cabin, a soft hum filled the air as the woman felt a small shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't the plane. It was the jets outside adjusting their position. She straightened slightly, sensing the gesture the way musicians sense a change in tone. She didn't need a radio call. She didn't need visual confirmation. She felt it. It was a goodbye. Not a dramatic one. Not a noisy one. A respectful, silent farewell the way aviators communicate when words are unnecessary. She placed her hand gently against the window, not pressing hard, just letting her fingers rest there for a brief moment. If someone saw it, they might think she was admiring the view. But in truth, it was her way of acknowledging the escort, her quiet salute back to the sky. Far outside, the F-22 pilots prepared to turn away from the flight path. One of them spoke softly, more to himself than to anyone else. She still reads the sky. You can feel it. His wingman nodded. It's an honor flying near her, even for just a few minutes. As their jets peeled away into open air, they maintained a firm, respectful distance, not crossing near the civilian flight. The movement was smooth, elegant, almost ceremonial. They disappeared into a patch of high white clouds, leaving nothing but open sky behind. Inside the plane, the woman felt the shift instantly, the space around them returning to normal, the air losing the subtle echo of powerful engines flying nearby. She took a small breath, steady and meaningful. The man beside her noticed her expression change slightly. You okay? He asked. She paused before answering. Yes, everything is fine. But the truth was deeper than that. It wasn't just fine. It was peaceful. The kind of peace that comes after something meaningful happens without needing attention or applause. A flight attendant approached her softly. Ma'am, can I get you anything else? Another drink, maybe? She shook her head with a warm, polite smile. No, thank you. The attendant hesitated again, studying her calm, composed face. There was something dignified about the woman, something the attendant couldn't describe. If you need anything, just let us know, she said before walking away. The woman returned her attention to the window. The sky now looked like any other sky on any normal day. The escort was gone, the air quiet, the horizon endless. Yet she felt something inside her settle, a long-buried part of her that had always belonged up here. The sky had acknowledged her one last time, not to pull her back, but to remind her that she had once mattered in ways few people ever would. And even though she no longer wore the uniform, the respect she earned had not faded with time. She whispered softly, "Goodbye," knowing the sky didn't need to hear it. It understood. The flight continued smoothly, gliding across wide stretches of calm sky. Most passengers had no idea anything unusual had happened. They were lost in movies, naps, or quiet conversations. The cabin felt warm and peaceful, filled with the soft hum of engines and the occasional laughter from a child a few rows away. But inside the woman's mind, the world was changing in ways no one could see. The escort was gone now, but the presence it carried stayed with her, like a quiet echo that softened slowly but never fully disappeared. She leaned her head slightly against the window and watched the thin line of the horizon, a place she once knew more deeply than she knew anything on the ground. It felt strange, realizing that after all these years, the sky still remembered her. The man beside her stretched a little, then smiled. This flight feels extra calm today. You'd almost think nothing is happening out there. She looked at him gently. Sometimes the biggest things happen quietly. He nodded, not fully understanding but sensing there was more behind her words. A few rows ahead, a young flight attendant slipped into the galley and whispered to the senior attendant, "Everything okay up front?" The captain looked different earlier. The senior attendant lowered her voice. "I don't know. Something's going on with the manifest. But it's not bad, just unusual. And it seems connected to that lady in 14A. The younger attendant glanced subtly toward the woman. She looked so calm. You'd never think anything special was happening. The senior attendant replied, "That's exactly why something is special." Back in her seat, the woman straightened her posture a little, as if acknowledging the truth she had avoided for years. She wasn't running from anything, but she had stepped away from a life that demanded strength every day. She had chosen simplicity, chosen quiet, chosen to disappear among ordinary people. But today proved something she didn't expect. You can leave the sky, but the sky never truly leaves you. She opened the small zipper of her backpack just enough to slip her hand inside. Her fingers touched a small, smooth item at the bottom, a round insignia she had carried all this time. She didn't take it out. She only held it for a moment, feeling the etched metal through the fabric. It reminded her of a time when her voice carried across secure channels, when pilots trusted her guidance with their lives, when her name meant safety in storms. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing one old memory to rise, one she rarely allowed herself to revisit. She was standing in a dark control room years ago, lights blinking across large screens while young pilots fought through a dangerous night flight. A quiet voice had cracked through the radio, shaking slightly, asking for help. She remembered how she steadied her breathing before responding, giving step-by-step instructions in a tone so calm it settled the entire room. She guided the jet home, every movement, every turn, until the pilot landed safely with tears in his eyes. That pilot later said, "I trusted you more than the instruments." She had never forgotten that. But she had never imagined that those she helped would one day rise high enough to command F-22s and silently acknowledge her across the sky. She opened her eyes again and let go of the insignia, zipping the bag closed. The man beside her glanced over. "You okay? You seem thoughtful." "I'm fine," she said with a small, genuine smile. "Just remembering old things." He nodded. "Good memories?" She took a moment before answering. "Yes, hard ones too, but important." He didn't ask more. He understood instinctively that her quiet life had not always been quiet. Up in the cockpit, the captain received one final message from air traffic control as the plane approached a new air zone. The words were simple: "F-22 patrol has exited. Express their regard if appropriate." The captain exhaled softly, showing the message to the first officer. "What does that even mean?" the officer whispered. The captain shook his head. "I think it means respect. Just that." Neither of them planned to say anything to the passengers. This event wasn't theirs to announce. It belonged to the woman in seat 14A, whoever she truly was. The rest of the flight settled into a quiet rhythm, and the woman felt that peace settle inside her too. Not the peace of running away or hiding, but the peace of understanding something she had once forgotten. Her work had mattered. Her years had left a mark. And even the sky remembered her name. She took a slow breath and watched the golden sunlight stretch across the wing. It felt like the sky itself was saying a soft farewell, one that didn't need words or gestures. The man beside her finally said, "You know, you seem like someone who made a difference in the world." She looked at him, surprised by his intuition but touched by his kindness. "I hope so," she replied softly. "I'm sure of it," he said. For the first time on the flight, a genuine smile warmed her face. Not a polite smile, not a guarded smile, a real one, deep, gentle, and full of quiet gratitude. The world may not have known who she was anymore. The passengers may have seen only an ordinary traveler. But somewhere in the blue above them, two pilots had flown in silent formation because of the legacy she carried quietly inside her. She didn't need applause. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need her name spoken aloud. The sky had spoken for her. And sometimes that is enough. As the aircraft began its slow descent toward the destination city, the cabin lights brightened gently. Passengers stretched, rubbed their eyes, and prepared themselves for landing. To them, this had been an ordinary flight, quiet, smooth, uneventful. But for the woman in seat 14A, it had been something else entirely. It had been a reminder, a quiet tap from the past, telling her that no matter how far she tried to step away from her old world, some parts of her would always remain connected to the sky. She watched the earth grow clearer beneath them. Fields, roads, buildings, everything taking shape like a map she was leaving behind in the clouds. The man beside her smiled lightly. Almost there. She nodded. Yes, almost. But her heart felt like it was in two places at once. Down there on the ground where her quiet life waited, and up in the sky where a part of her still belonged. The captain's calm voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened. The woman fastened hers without looking down, her fingers moving automatically, like a habit from long ago. She took one last glance at the sky outside, soft, endless, familiar. It gave her a sense of ease she didn't always find on the ground. She whispered quietly, "Thank you for today." The man next to her heard the faintest part of it. "Thanking the sky?" he asked with a gentle smile. She smiled too. Something like that. The landing gear dropped smoothly, and the plane touched the runway with a calm, steady glide. A few passengers clapped softly, mostly out of habit, but the woman simply breathed slowly, absorbing the feeling of the wheels meeting earth again. The plane slowed, turned, and eventually stopped near the gate. Everyone stood up, gathering their bags and preparing to exit. The woman remained seated for a moment, not out of hesitation but out of quiet reflection. The flight had ended, and with it, a chapter she hadn't expected to revisit. When she finally stood, the man beside her said, "Whatever your story is, I'm glad the sky remembers you." She paused, surprised by how accurately he captured something she never said aloud. "Thank you," she replied softly. "That's kind." They joined the slow line moving toward the front of the cabin. Passengers exchanged polite nods with the flight attendants, thanking them for a good flight. When the woman reached the doorway, the senior flight attendant looked at her briefly, long enough to sense there was something special about her, though she couldn't explain why. "Have a wonderful day, ma'am," the attendant said warmly. "You too," the woman replied with a sincere smile. As she stepped out of the aircraft, the sunlight on the jet bridge felt warm against her face. She walked calmly, steady steps, blending in with the flow of passengers who knew nothing about the quiet salute that had taken place above the clouds. Outside the gate, life carried on as usual. Families meeting loved ones, travelers rushing to connecting flights, people checking schedules and screens. She walked through the crowd unnoticed, just another face in the airport. And that was exactly how she wanted it. But as she approached the main exit, a small moment stopped her. In the distance, through the airport windows, she saw two faint white trails in the sky. Far away, barely visible but unmistakable. The fading signature of two jets that had already crossed beyond sight. She didn't stare for long. She didn't need to. She understood what those trails meant. She understood the message. You were here. We knew. We remembered. She touched her backpack briefly, feeling the small insignia inside. A symbol she had chosen not to wear anymore, but never truly let go of. Then she walked out of the terminal, the automatic doors closing quietly behind her. The world outside was busy with honking cars, rolling suitcases, and tired travelers searching for taxis. She blended into all of it effortlessly, like she always did. But her steps felt lighter than before, her heart steadier, her memories no longer as heavy. For the first time in years, She felt at peace with the part of her life she had tried so hard to bury. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need applause. She didn't need anyone to know. The sky knew, and that was enough. As she disappeared into the crowd, the soft breeze outside the airport touched her face, gentle, almost greeting her. She looked up one last time and whispered, "Goodbye, and thank you." Then she walked toward her quiet life, carrying with her the silent respect of the sky she once commanded, and the knowledge that her name, though unspoken, still carried weight in places she thought she had left behind forever.